Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall, and today I'm very welcome, or rather very happy to have Kamal Patel on the podcast. I am kind of a little bit embarrassed that it's taken me so long to get Kamal on the podcast because I've been following himself and the team of Examine.com, which is where many of the audience may now kind of their ears prick up, and Kamal is behind Examine.com, and he is a nutrition researcher. He has published peer-reviewed articles and is the co-founder and director of Examine.com. And I've been following Examine.com, and the reason I'm embarrassed is because pretty much since they launched in like 2012, 2011, that sort of time is when I came across them, and I loved them from the get-go, and kind of this mission statement that I took from the website just kind of, I was like, yeah, that's why I love them, and that's why I think the listeners should go and check them out if they haven't. Examine.com simplifies nutrition and supplementation through meticulous analysis of the latest research to help answer your questions on how to be healthier. And we're not here to tell you what to do. Instead, we simply tell you what the evidence says. And in cases where the research is mixed, we make that clear too, which is like, that's what this podcast is all about, and that's why I love kind of what you're doing at Examine.com. So yeah, I'm really happy to have you here, Kamal. I'd love to hear kind of a little bit more about your background, what got you into kind of where you are now, why Examine.com kind of became what it is, because I think that's kind of a nice, hopefully a nice backstory. I think it'll be interesting, at least I'm interested.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know how many of your listeners were sort of on the fitness, bodybuilding, powerlifting internet in, let's say, the early 2000s, but there was always a lot of good information out there. I remember when I first started lifting weights, then I would read, bodybuilding.com, T-Mag, T-Nation, whatever it's called back then, and, Usenet groups. And it's always been good information. It's just hard to find the needle in the haystack. You would try to find evidence-based information, but if you didn't read the papers directly, you would hear from, this health expert or this guru, and then you wouldn't quite be sure who's correct. Somebody would say you shouldn't combine fat and carbs in the post-workout period, and somebody else would say, no, it's fine, and then you're like, well, who do I trust? So I was getting into that in college in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I used to read, John Berardi, Lyle McDonald, the people in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I was a really skinny kid. When I got to college, I just so happened to have a next door neighbor in my dorm who was a power lifter. So I had never lifted weights before. I have very small joints. And I was basically like, I'm never going to be able to gain muscle, so I won't even try. But then one day, this guy was just so huge and so quiet. He was like an enigma. So I asked him one day at lunch, I was like, so, what's the balance here? Like, do you focus more on what you're doing in the gym, what you're eating, something else? And he said, it's pretty much 90% what you're eating and what you take. And then at the gym is important, but that's kind of just rounding off the edges. So I went to the gym for the first time, and I think my max was maybe a 5-pound plate on each side. So I was quite weak. And the ensuing 2 years, I gained a lot more muscle, my first muscle of all time, and I got really into nutrition. So I just went headfirst into the library, into the stacks of the library, and started reading journals. Eventually, I went to school for public health and nutrition, and I got really into sports nutrition. At a certain point, I started having a lot of injuries, and I had a couple of surgeries that went poorly, and I was diagnosed with a connective tissue disorder. So that's why I got hurt so easily. I would break a PR on bench and get hurt. I would, try to do Olympic lifts and I would get hurt, but I would just kind of get through it, go on to the next thing. But after a few surgeries, it wasn't working out. That's when I got into more non-sports nutrition stuff. And my first big project was working on the vitamin D guidelines in the US in 2008 and 2009. When the Institute of Medicine revised the guidelines. So as part of the systematic review to look at outcomes for bone health on that. And in the years since, Examine started, and our purpose really is just to connect people to the actual research. So the idea is that nobody can read all the studies. No individual person, whether it's me or anybody on our team, can, but we have a team of researchers who do that every day. So we try to just kind of let loose and show all of what the research says without any intermediary. Like, we don't have any opinions. We don't say whether keto is good or bad. We don't say whether vegan is good or bad. We just say what the evidence says about those things and about different supplements. And we know we make mistakes because research makes mistakes. So we try to be about as real as we can possibly be.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Not only, I think it's always interesting to hear why people become passionate about what they're doing. And I'm really sorry that you had to go through what you went through with kind of the injuries. And I imagine that must have been, I mean, hopefully now you're kind of in a better place, but I imagine at the time that must have been pretty frustrating for you.
Yeah, it's not super fun. The first couple of years after it, I didn't do anything but PT. And my idea was I would get back into lifting, because just before I had my first surgery is when I was going to do my first meet, powerlifting. And I was a wannabe powerlifter. I just didn't want to get last place at the meet. That was my whole goal. And then that didn't happen. And a couple of years after the surgery, I still didn't get back to lifting weights and supplements and diets for that purpose. So, I still can't lift weights. So now I know exactly how much muscle you lose if you don't lift weights. People are always like, oh, if I go 3 or 4 weeks without lifting, what happens? Well, from personal experience, I know it's not very much. You might think you're losing a lot of muscle, but you're not. But now I know how important it is to look at all facets of lifting, not just, like creatine or sets and reps.
Well, selfishly, I'm kind of thinking at least something very good came out of it in some ways, in that examine.com now exists. And I think the reason you kind of put it there in terms of like no one can read all the research, I always say it as like, I think a lot of people listening to this actually will be coaches themselves, and I'm a coach, and it's like nowadays with all the information out there and people like to kind of feel like they know it all and kind of, oh, I should be reading the research, and it could sometimes feel pressure to be on top of things, and someone asks you about a supplement or a client does. And in the past I'd always be like, oh, I have to like go dig through all the studies, or like I have to show them and reference this, and like now I'm just like, I'm going to send you a link to examine.com, and I think that's all right because I trust the information they put there. And I mean, I think it's fantastic that is there. And obviously you guys don't just do supplementation, but that's kind of something that I really found to be really helpful, because there is just so much bad out there. Like, you can't go to a website that sells supplements and expect them to tell you the truth. They're going to cherry pick and all this sort of thing.
Yeah. To put it mildly, you can't really expect too much.
Yeah. So something, obviously, like I said off air to you, the listeners on this podcast are coaches of physique competitors, maybe physique competitors themselves, or people just very interested in building muscle and also losing fat, and always looking for like the next thing. And I always like to preface supplementation with the fact that, as per the kind of muscle and strength pyramids, it's at the top. It's not going to be the thing that's going to make the difference. It's after kind of you've got your training in place, you've got your nutrition in place, all of that good stuff. The sleep is there and taken care of. And then supplements can help as like the sprinkles on the top. But they're always looking for kind of the next best thing, or something that might just give them the edge. So I'd love initially to probably go over some supplements that a lot of people are already taking, but I think are good for just confirmation that you think would be beneficial for kind of that physique competitor.
Yeah, so most of the supplements people probably already know, because at this point there's been so much research. So let's say 50% of people are creatine responders, so that's the obvious one. And then there's issues around creatine, like, do you have to cycle creatine, what form, and that kind of thing. Usually the answer is the most basic one, like other than just regular micronized creatine monohydrate. Other forms typically don't help unless somebody happens to have more GI distress with a basic form and they want to try other forms in case that helps. If taking it with food and a full food matrix, including fat and protein and whatnot, if that doesn't help, then maybe another form would help. And then a lot of people, most people, I think, maybe don't cycle off creatine. And then we did interview a creatine researcher a few years ago who mentioned that he doesn't feel like there's a need. There's not a it's not like you produce less creatine if you stop taking it or if you take it for a long time, but he does cycle just for the purpose of once you saturate with creatine, then you can stop taking it for a while and still experience benefit. So it's like, why not? Like the marginal decrease in performance from stopping taking it is low to nothing, and the unknowns are always there. So might as well cycle. Other than creatine, I think a decent amount of people take pre-workouts, including nitrates now. So that's something that might be marginally more important for health than for lifting. But in my mind, it's really good to get that 1-2 punch where your supplements both help your life and health and lifting, because often a lifting supplement will either be neutral or not help your life. And if you go on the extreme end, if you have pharmaceutical enhancement, then above a certain level, it'll be detrimental. So for some of these things, it's like you might as well take dietary nitrates, whether that's a supplement like beet juice or whether it's a smoothie that you take that has some mildly not good tasting greens in them, like kale. It's usually pretty good. And then protein obviously is just sufficient. How much is optimal and the frequency. So we do have a protein calculator on our website that is 99% evidence based. The reason I don't say 100% is that we have some recent numbers we're going to plug in the next week, and we'll probably send an email out next week or the week after with our update. And the reason behind the update is just the newer studies use the indicator amino acid oxidation method, where typically the minimum requirement for optimizing protein intake is higher than has previously been thought. That being said, it's still not super high, and the optimal frequency is still not super high. So there does appear to be some benefit to, let's say, 3 over 2 times or 4 over 3 times a day, but not really for like 6 over 5 times. And then other things are, some people do find some benefit from a pre-workout, caffeine, theanine. Some people find a benefit from certain choline-related substances, alpha GPC, CDP choline, beta-alanine, and certain other mainstays. But those are much more personalized than creatine and protein and nitrates. If we say that creatine, protein, nitrates help over 50% of people, everything else is much less than 50%. And in fact, I doubt for some pre-workout supplements that they have a sustained benefit if somebody takes them every day that they work out. But that's just my hunch. And admittedly, I'm not personally experiencing this anymore. I have taken basically every lifting supplement, but it's been years. And there are other kind of newer supplements or supplements that had less research before. So one random example is ARA, arachidonic acid, and not many people take that. And there was a poster presentation at a conference about 4 years ago that indicated it might have some benefit, but there hasn't been too much since then. There's also that whole controversy about HMB, and that appears to have been a little bit overrated. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot of stuff. There's like a very small amount of research on supplements that were indicated for other stuff like ashwagandha, but the evidence is pretty weak right now.
Okay. That's fantastic. It's obviously I was expecting creatine monohydrate to come in, and I have heard of people cycling it, like people who I don't know any better, but I've also heard well-knowing people kind of cycle it as just what if the body, the body and the biology, like a lot of the time you can kind of, I guess some things desensitize and potentially you can remove it and then plug it back in and it might have a better effect. So it's interesting to hear that the researcher is kind of happy to remove it for a period of time because saturation lasts quite a while. Did he mention how long he cycles off for?
I don't remember offhand, but I don't know if you have links in podcasts, or I can send you the interview we did. Okay. I think it might be publicly on the website. I'm not sure. I think his name is Scott Forbes, and he specifically lists the dose he takes and his frequency and how long its hiatus is. The other supplement that I think most people know this, but not everybody. If you take if you take caffeine as a pre-workout supplement, then you do have to cycle that. And some people don't realize that. They still take it for a long period and they're like, oh, maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. You have to cycle creatine because caffeine. So many of the best supplements start with the C, carnitine, creatine. It's really hard to keep track. But creatine, if you don't cycle it, you'll still get kind of vigilance benefits and maybe even slight focus benefits, but you won't get a pre-workout benefit. You really have to cycle caffeine if you take that as a pre-workout. And because most of the other synergistic pre-workout supplements have similar mechanisms, you probably have to cycle those as well. So if you really want to pre-workout at all times, you should at least try a different pre-workout supplement that works in a different method, and then go back to caffeine.
Do you know roughly how long kind of the washout period might be for caffeine? Do you have I guess it might be individual dependent, but
It is dependent on the individual because there's genetic variations, but it's for most people, they usually go off it for at least a week.
Okay. Yeah, I know it's caffeine. I mean, pre-workouts are always an interesting one. When first getting into the gym, it's one of the exciting things alongside like whey protein or like protein powders that you might take. And I was very into it. I think I've forgotten what there was that one that got banned because it had a certain substance. I think it was Jack 3D. If you remember Jacked, that was one that I was kind of.
Oh yeah.
I think I had like one scoop of that. And then I got scared and sold it to someone after it got banned. But
yeah, I know I had that. So it seems to cycle like every decade something happens. So that might have been what was taken off the market before. Before that, I used to take I can't remember what it was, but some of the products had above their label claims of ephedrine back in the day.
Oh.
And the college I went to, a student on the football team actually died.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was crazy because that was when I was first getting into lifting. So that kind of gave me a shock because I had a tub of it, in my dorm room. And it scared me shitless. I was like, you could easily die if you, like, how can you trust them to either match the label claims, or how can you trust yourself to be like, oh, I love this pump so much, I'm going to take a little bit extra. So the things I kind of didn't screw around with were fat burners and pre-workouts too much. I would always take a low level and cycle off.
Yeah, I think that's smart. Actually, on that point, it was something I was thinking to ask about creatine. Is obviously there's the Creapure kind of variant of creatine monohydrate. Is that something you think is worthwhile for someone? I mean, it seems like it's a no-brainer to do it, but is it really worthwhile? Like, how do you think that is something that if someone is looking for the best, they should be getting Creapure?
I think it depends specifically on the person. So most people, like there's my official estimation as somebody who's speaking on behalf of Examine, and there's my personal one. So we never talk about brands for Examine because we just stick to papers, right? Yep. And usually we don't even talk about kind of individual level differences. But for myself, I'd say people I've talked to, creatine is not very expensive. So if somebody were to try a different form, or try Creapure, which is it's in a lot of supplements right now, right? That's not much of a premium to pay if you feel like it benefits you for either your response or its mixability or its GI distress. But it's not technically necessary because people will take the cheapest stupid creatine and experience exactly the same benefit. It really depends on the person, I think.
Okay. Yeah, it's creatine. I don't know if this is at least my experience. I wonder if it's the same for even when you were taking it or some of the listeners. Creatine is one of those where I'm just like, there's so much good research behind it. I don't feel like I notice anything. Maybe it's because I've just been taking it so long, but I just take it because it's like, well, I don't get any downsides, and there's probably upsides happening. I'm just not. I don't necessarily see them.
Yeah, it's totally like that, and it's actually not that different than like longevity supplements. Like people will take supplements for longevity and they take it because it seems pretty safe and there's research. For creatine, sometimes people don't know if it's been helping because it definitely helped at the beginning. It helped me at the beginning, but I wasn't sure after that. Especially in like year 10, I had no idea. I was like, is this doing anything?
Yeah.
But creatine also has potential non-lifting benefits. Like, there was a trial for a major depression. There's not been that many well-controlled studies, but there was one 2 or 3 years ago that implied that it might benefit certain connections in the brain where what are they called? I'm no neuroscientist, but there's these when neurons connect to other neurons, then one of the methods the brain uses, I guess, is to have just a few select broader pathways, kind of like highways when everything else is a side street. And creatine could help foster those broader highways because it's directly used by the brain and for cognition. That doesn't apply to the everyman who's using it for lifting, but it could have benefits. The one detriment that people often ask us about is the potential for future hair loss.
Yes.
And that's the one that's tough. We did update our article, I think, a year or two ago on that. And signs point to probably no, because the intermediary was it wasn't directly on testosterone. And it was that one study in a few rugby players, and it didn't actually measure hair loss. So it did measure DHT, but that's not the end game, and it could have been a rogue study. So I don't know what the answer is to that. That's where Examine won't tell people exactly what they want to know. They want to know, should I not take creatine because of hair loss? My dad has hair loss. Does that mean I should not take it? If you are experiencing hair loss, it doesn't hurt to stop taking creatine. It's better to not lose your hair to lift 10 less pounds than it is to lose your hair and be like, crap, I should have not taken creatine. So, might as well try it or try not to.
Hey, Pascal here. I just wanted to take the moment to talk about our membership site. Inside, you'll find a thriving forum, an extensive exercise library, courses, presentations, and research reviews. All I need you to do is hit the link in the description below and sign up. See you there.
I think, Kamal, that's subjective. I think I might take the weight gain.
Yeah.
You can get hair implants now.
I forgot about that. And you can rub stuff on your scalp, and you can take pills, and there's lots of
It's also, what was interesting was nitrates. I think you kind of mentioned it as one that's probably more common, but I'm not sure it's, at least for me, it's actually not something that I'm currently thinking to supplement with. And I wasn't aware that maybe the research is as strong as, I guess it's not on the level of creatine, but I'd love to hear a bit more about the strength of the evidence on that.
Yeah, the evidence is not nearly as strong as creatine. And the reason is that creatine has basically a direct effect on muscle growth. Due to water and stimulation of the cell, whereas nitrates are different, and they probably on average benefit longer duration exercise a bit more than shorter duration. But even with shorter duration, it's possible because it can increase blood flow, vasodilation, that kind of thing. And the idea for health is actually somewhat similar to the idea for lifting. So with health, it's that researchers used to think in the 80s that the benefit of vegetables health-wise was that the fiber helped you, the fiber helps your gut, the fiber helps prevent you from eating more and all that stuff. And that could be the case, but kind of the newer thinking is maybe some of these, especially dark green vegetables and beets and stuff like that, when you get nitrates from them, then for a short period after that, you experience some vasodilation and other benefits. And if you eat a couple times a day and you have a salad both times or one of the times, then you get that temporary dilation and blood flow benefits and that kind of thing basically every day of your life, whereas somebody who doesn't eat vegetables wouldn't get that. So that could also happen with lifting and with maybe more longer duration stuff like CrossFit and longer duration stuff like endurance activity. But it's not a slam dunk for lifting. The evidence is weaker for that than for medium duration stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think I'd actually like to touch on, before maybe diving into some of the ones with even less evidence. You mentioned kind of nitrates for health, creatine for health. I guess as people who push their bodies to the limits, potentially we need more of certain substances, and there may be some common deficiencies or things that potentially we're a little bit low on. I'd love to hear kind of what you think, maybe some things that we could think about supplementing. And I guess obviously you did your vitamin D research, so definitely in the modern age, there's some things that we may not be getting enough of.
Yeah, so I think a decent chunk of people just forget to get their vitamin D tested. So at this point, nobody forgets about vitamin D because it's been in the news for a decade. But there's a lot of people who either have never gotten a vitamin D test or have only gotten one several years ago. Vitamin D testing is extremely cheap, and over where you are, it might be free, you know, because your healthcare system is better than ours. So I feel like you might as well do it. And the reason that's important is because there are genetic variations in one's ability to metabolize vitamin D, and it can vary by ethnicity. It could potentially even vary by random determinants, where like your brother or sister might have a higher vitamin D level than you, even though you take the same supplement. It's just really hard to predict. In fact, the first time I got tested, vitamin D tested, I had taken a multi with 400 IUs of vitamin D almost every day for a year, and I tested low, borderline low, which tells me like you have to get tested. And then when you get tested, then try to be at least in the middle range of your government or the Endocrine Society in the US or some other knowledgeable body, their range that is recommended. And, don't take the D2 supplement that some physicians prescribe. It's less effective than the D3 form. And when you take vitamin D, at least take a little bit of fat with it, because it requires a little bit of fat to be absorbed. Not as much as the other fat-soluble vitamins, but at least a little bit. Other stuff that people forget about are nutrients, basically. So I think in general, it's probably more important to take supplements for health than for lifting. And the theory is just that if one thinks back about, what their plateaus might have been due to off, for myself, it was because of injury, but I can't speak for most people. I guess, you're probably a good example. When you've had breaks that have been enforced or dips in your lifting, has it been due to like life stuff or, health stuff or what?
Yeah, I mean, I say it quite a lot. I feel like I say it a lot, but like injury is the worst nightmare of someone who's a lifter. It's like if you can, the best bodybuilders, the ones who have been lifting the longest without setbacks. If you're injured, you can't be pushing forward. Equally injured or ill, which could both be impacted, obviously health wise.
Yeah, so injury and illness. Injury is something every lifter has faced. Illness is, I guess, especially important now, right? If you're sidelined by COVID, it's not going to be like you have a cold. It could be a situation where, and I'm hoping, nearly 100% of your listeners are not COVID deniers. So there are some people, especially in the US, who still say like it's nothing, but it's not nothing. It's not like you get diagnosed in the center of the world. It's highly individualized, but it's possible that for some people, it could be a situation where it sidelines you for weeks or months even of subpar performance. So in today's age, it's illness and injury is both good form and not pushing yourself too much, but also recovery and kind of joint and pain supplements. And then illness is immune system supplements. And I would guess those are more important overall than creatine, beta-alanine, pre-workout supplements. So I'm not blaming people for focusing on what they think will help them at the gym, but usually what helps you at the gym is things that will make you keep going to the gym consistently. It's very much like I tried to start learning French a few years ago, and I totally failed. And every year I try to bring it back, and I try to do a lot, and then I just fail again. And recently I decided I'm just going to stop because I just keep failing every year. And it's because I never do the tortoise and the hare strategy. If I would have done even 10 minutes a day every day for the past 10 years, then I could move to France now and understand and speak perfectly, but I don't do that. So at the gym, the extreme end of that is sort of do you know the whole, what is it, body by science sort of thing? The Doug McGuff and doing
I have heard of it. Yeah.
Like, one workout every week of 15 minutes. Obviously, that's not going to make you into Dorian Yates. But doing what Dorian Yates does is going to make you into somebody who will never lift again. So there's some area in between there as far as frequency that you know more about than I do. But I know that if you push yourself at the gym, there's going to be questions like, should I take glutamine to help my immune system so that if I get sick, I can get myself back in the gym? Or should I take more of nutrients and multivitamins to support my pushing really hard? There's no super clear answers to that, but I can speak to some of those things. So for example, a multivitamin, it's actually really hard to find a good one. And there's even a question of whether it's good to take a multivitamin, because meta-analysis is when you pool all the studies that have been done, all the trials, and see what the effect is quantitatively. A systematic review is to do all of that qualitatively. And usually a study does a systematic review plus a meta-analysis if there's been enough studies. When there's been meta-analyses of multivitamins and health, usually it's a neutral impact on almost every health marker. Occasionally there's a slight benefit for something, and occasionally there's a slight detriment for something. And sometimes the detriment is for mortality, which is not good.
Wow.
So most people consider a multivitamin and they look for one that has a lot of each nutrient, but that probably isn't the best way to go. So probably the best way to go is to see what you're deficient in and then supplement with those targeted nutrients. And the reason that's important is that if you look for a multivitamin that has a lot of all the most important nutrients in the best forms, you might be able to find one, but a lot of the most important nutrients take up a lot of space. So magnesium, for example, takes up a lot of space. You need a lot of magnesium in your body. And you would have to take several vitamin pills in order to get that. And one is just a logistic issue. If you're already taking a lot of pills, taking a lot of more pills isn't super fun. But the other issue is that nutrients can occasionally have reduced absorption when they're taken with other nutrients, and this especially applies to certain minerals. The other thing is that there might be slight absorption differences whether a multivitamin is one of those packed pills where it's powder packed together, or if it's a capsule that has powder inside of it. And if you take the multivitamin with other supplements, then that could change absorption, and it depends on what food you eat it with. So usually it might be good to both look at what you're deficient in and what humans in general are deficient in. So we already know about vitamin D, but in general, people tend to be probably a bit more deficient in minerals that could help performance than in vitamins that could help performance. And the two reasons are that you can lose minerals more easily when you sweat. And then that's a little bit more the case for endurance, but not always, because you can definitely sweat a lot in a weight workout. But the second thing is that we don't drink hard water anymore. When we drink water from our taps, then that water is soft water, and it's almost completely lacking in magnesium and calcium, for example. So if you're going to try to replenish that through the diet, it could work out fine if you're eating a lot of dairy, but if you're not, then it's important to try to get it through pills. And usually the best forms and amounts won't be in multivitamins, which is why you have to look at how much of each nutrient you're getting and then go from there. And not speaking on behalf of Examine, but for myself, there's not that many apps where you can plug in your diet and find out what your nutrient levels are. The one that I've seen people use a lot is Chronometer or Chronometer, or I don't know how that's pronounced, but that shows exactly how much of each nutrient, in addition to like omega-3 and omega-6, is in the food that you eat.
And I guess on that note of the omegas, is that, from what I gather with omega-3s, for me at least, it's been one where it was like a health halo was almost on it, and it was like the next best thing. And then there's been, as more research has kind of come out, it's been like we're just not necessarily known yet if that's something that definitely everyone should be supplementing with. Is that a correct summarization of things that let the listeners really know where things lie?
Yeah, that's about correct. So when I was at the research center where I was working on vitamin D, there was a concurrent project on a systematic review of omega-3 for, I think, all heart-related outcomes. And those kind of things can actually be a little bit misleading because they're highly dependent on which studies they include and how they weight them. So if there's a big new study that has a lot of people in it and it finds an extreme outcome, that could shift the meta-analysis to showing that omega-3s are beneficial. Or if you take a population in Japan, for example, and you do a study on them, omega-3s might not help them as much because they eat more seafood, baseline. So the population can impact things. And then the last thing is that the form can impact things. So if a certain study looks at supplement with more DHA than EPA, then that can influence things. So it gets really, really messy. And luckily, researchers do subgroup analysis to see which forms are best and whatever, but that makes the results a little less reliable. So in general, I think it's good to step back from this whole thing. You know, even though we look at studies a lot at exam, it's always good to think, you know, if I didn't have this computer and I sat here and I looked at all these studies, what would I just think about the supplement? So when you're taking fish oil, you're taking something that is used as a signaling molecule in the body. The membranes of our cells have different amounts of fat to influence their fluidity and how responsive they are to signals from other cells. So you have to have some omega-3 in there. And you have to have omega-6 in your diet. But generally, the issue isn't so much that we're so low on omega-3s. Generally, the issue is that we're so high in omega-6s. And unluckily, that's a little bit hard to understand for most people, because it's not like a government message could have a 10-second ad that said, hey, omega-6 and omega-3 does this, and you're too high in omega-6. That's too complicated. But, you know, your listeners are probably a bit smarter than the average person. Omega-6 is pretty easy to reduce as long as you eat higher quality foods, because omega-6 is mostly present in like cheap salad dressing, you know, or cheap baked goods or whatever. But if you go, you know, to France, or if you go to certain other countries where typically a little bit more whole foods is eaten, then butter, you know, there's people who eat like sticks of butter, low carb people, and are like, I'm going to eat whatever I want because, you know, I'm going to eat as much saturated fat as possible. I'm not saying saturated fat is bad, but it's not bad or good. Like eating butter and eating olive oil and eating beef fat and having nuts and stuff, like those fats don't get easily oxidized because they're not highly processed. Whereas salad dressing, like the oils in a cheap salad dressing are very easily oxidized, even in the bottle itself. By the time it gets to your body at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, it's going to get pretty oxidized probably. So that's why a lot of oils have to be deodorized when they're on the shelves, so that when you open it doesn't smell real bad. That's good, except you can never really know how much of it is rancid. So fat is by far the most misunderstood macronutrient, because people always ratchet their carbs up and down. They'll try to optimize their proteins. Fat is the leftover. But fat is not the leftover. Fat is extremely important because your body runs and signals on fat, and your brain is made up of fat. And then your adipose tissue stores get released over the course of years. So you can't just decide one day, oh, I'm going to change the types of fat I eat, and then I'll be healthy. Like, you have to plan this out in advance and take many months to see any effect. Whereas carbs, you could be like, I'm 2 weeks into a low carb diet and I lost, 8 pounds. Of course, 6 pounds is through a loss of glycogen, but still, it's fairly easy to lose weight on a low carb diet. Or you could boost your protein and be like, oh, I feel a lot more energetic. Like if you ever watched any of those crappy survival shows, which I watch a lot of, they'll be like, I haven't eaten for 2 days and I'm eating these like berries and they're not doing much. And then they find, like a mole rat or some random animal and they eat it and they feel awesome. It's because protein is called protein for a reason. I think linguistically, the Greek origins, it's like primary. It's the primary nutrient. But aside from that, the second primary is fat. So I think my number one recommendation is to focus very highly on changing the types of fat you eat to make sure that they're all not good fats in terms of like they're good because they have a lot of omega-3, but good in the sense that they're somewhat natural. Like canola oil is seen as healthy by government agencies and stuff, and obviously the industry that makes canola oil. But canola oil stands for Canadian Oil Low Acid. Like, it's an acronym. It's not a real thing. It used to be called rapeseed, but that's not a good marketing term. So canola oil is not terrible, but in order to make canola oil, you have to put the oil through like a hexane solvent. You have to deodorize it and all this stuff. Who wants to put that into their body frequently? I mean, I put it into my body on occasion, more than on occasion sometimes, but it's the dose that matters. If you make yourself the staple fat in your diet to be a highly processed oil, that's probably not good for you. or your eventual long-term lifting goals. It's more like, what did the golden age bodybuilders eat? You know, they had milk, they had meat, they had vegetables, they had fruits. That probably works pretty okay. You know, work for them, it'll work for us.
Really interesting. I think with fats, I think you're completely right, is that it is quite misunderstood, and even saturated fat, like, again, people view it, like you said, it's not good or bad, it's just the dose that's important. And I think people are very aware of trans fats as generally being something to avoid. But I love, obviously, you went over canola oil, rapeseed oil. What are the ones, if you are looking at ones for people to, I guess, avoid, but certainly kind of balance within their diet and not overemphasize them? What are the ones that you're thinking are probably the ones to do that with?
So in general, if you ever see a label on a package or on a bottle that says the ingredients are this oil or this oil or this oil, then what that means is that all those oils are substitutable. Like the product can be made with one or more of those oils. And the ones I see on labels like that are soybean oil, peanut oil, canola oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil. Those are, and occasionally cottonseed oil, but those are usually cheaper products. So those are all substitutable because they're cheap, and they have little flavor by themselves. Peanut oil, but the other ones don't. So those are all oils generally to be minimized. And I'm saying minimized for a reason, not avoided. Because it's all dose dependent, some people choose to eat clean, quote unquote, and that's fine, you know, and they'll never eat those oils. And in a sense, that's better because they never have to worry about it. Other people are just normal people, you know, and they want to live their lives. And if they go to somebody's house, they eat chips or whatever, and that's fine too. But you have so much adipose tissue that having a little bit of a certain oil is not going to make that much of a difference. So if you want to do it for yourself, that's fine. But the most annoying thing in the world is when you're at a grocery store and somebody's kind of looking over your shoulder at what you're buying. And I never tell anybody anything about nutrition, even though that's my field, because everybody feels so strongly. It's like religion, you know, like people who are vegan or people that are keto or people that are carnivore or people that or whatever. There's people who do it because they're doing it for themselves, and there's people who do it for themselves and become evangelists. But then there's people who will tell you at a grocery store that what you're buying is bad, or give, you know, quote unquote helpful advice. I don't want to hear that, you know. I don't want to hear family members or friends tell me that either. So it's just important to have to be gentle with yourself for what you're eating, because I know people have hard lives. So if it makes it a little bit easier for you to eat unhealthy once a week, twice a week, every day, but just a little bit, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
You know, quality of life is about as important as gains or health.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And the only other one, I think, obviously you mentioned magnesium. I think I remember reading some research about kind of athletes and what they can kind of commonly be deficient in. And zinc was one of the ones that came up, and that is quite a common one for people to supplement with. Is that something that you'd consider one to have a look for?
Yeah, zinc is worth supplementing with. Possibly it's worth even a little bit more now because of COVID. And I'm not saying that like it prevents COVID at all. There's no research, there's no randomized trials into preventing COVID, but zinc is so essential to immunity. It's essential in one way, but it's used in a different way. It's essential because it influences gene expression and the mechanisms that the immune system uses to get rid of pathogens. But in an immediate way, it's used in those lozenges, right? And the lozenges aren't for upping your zinc intake. I don't know, maybe all your listeners know this, but I'm kind of surprised sometimes that people don't. Zinc as a lozenge is used directly only for impact at the back of the throat. It's not used to up your zinc intake in general. Like it will, because you'll swallow it, but there's two substances, minerals, that are used to prevent pathogens from content, that copper and zinc. So a friend who works at the CDC in the US, and he does research on things to be used in hospitals to prevent infections. And copper is super expensive, but they try to figure out how best to use it in hospitals because it kills pathogens on contact. So similarly, Zinc lozenges are often marketed as homeopathic, but it's mislabeled. Homeopathic, generally from homeopaths, means it's diluted so much that there's no substance left to it, which is why homeopathy is generally like probably not real. But zinc is not homeopathic, even if it's labeled as such. So when you take the lozenges, the zinc interacts with pathogens at the back of the throat before they can multiply a lot and kind of invade the rest of the body. So that's why taking, I don't know what the brand names are over there, but taking some of those quote unquote homeopathic lozenges here in the form of zinc gluconate or zinc acetate could be helpful for colds, maybe flu, who knows about COVID.
Fast, efficient fat loss. Does that sound like music to your ears? The mini cut movement might just be for you. Mini cuts are like robbing the fat bank. You want to get in and out with as much fat as possible. In a short period of time, you could easily look to lose 6 to 12 pounds of fat. The mini cut movement is excellent. There's group support for extra accountability and also expert help within the group. We have educational videos to keep you on track along the way, and you get all your nutrition and training customized and individualized for you. So if that sounds of interest, get involved with the mini cut movement. Really cool. Yeah, I think the take home I at least have from that is, if you're really looking to get serious about this and you want to invest in supplements, getting a blood test is probably like the best thing you can do, like a general health, kind of see what your markers are. And then you can, like you said, rather than doing a shotgun approach of maybe get enough of this and kind of risking whether or not you're even going to be getting what you think you're getting, you can kind of do a bit of a sniper and be like, okay, I know I'm low on that. Like I can either address it in my diet or I can to supplement.
Yeah, and I think for whichever coaches are listening out there, in a sense, when I spent one summer personal training. I got like one of the less good certifications when I was in college or grad school, and I personal trainer. I was a terrible personal trainer. I would just talk about nutrition all the time. But at that point, people would just they want to know sets, reps, they want to get motivated and stuff. I feel like in the past 15 or 20 years, there's a little bit of a shift where more people want to know more about nutrition and supplements, and it like almost always comes up. And it's almost like some personal trainers end up knowing more about supplements than some physicians do, and they're more of like the client will take your word for it, right? And in that case, if you're doing stuff for your client extra on top of the kind of official personal training, being knowledgeable about entering your client's information into one of those tools that spits out the exact micronutrients is actually really super helpful. Because especially if you have no skin in the game, if you're not like a brand ambassador for some supplement company or whatever, like you're really objective. So you could say, hey, you don't have to do anything. Don't download an app. Just give me what you're eating for these days. I'll tell you what you're low in, and I can recommend foods that are higher in those nutrients. Like, for example, Brazil nuts are really high in selenium. Oysters and other shellfish are really high in zinc. You can try to find things that a client likes, and then that could be a lifelong habit for them. It's like you avoided them having to buy a supplement. You gave them something that they can use in recipes, and it's just kind of healthier. So it's an underappreciated part of being a trainer, I think. And if people can kind of make that part of their job, then I think it could be really helpful.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think like the health aspect in general is, I mean, that's part of the reason we train anyway, is part of it is also for health, I think, for a lot of people. And we mentioned kind of obviously immune function. Is there anything specifically towards that we can be doing to support that?
There's not a ton. The supplements or the nutrients that are involved in immune function that everybody thinks of are zinc, vitamin C, vitamin A. But in general, antioxidants and supplements you take for immune health don't have that much effect compared to your endogenous antioxidant system. So glutathione, for example, is a antioxidant system in your body. And those antioxidant systems are supported by nutrients like copper, zinc, and selenium. So it's pretty important to get those minerals. And it's actually fairly hard to get them all at once. Like you either have to buy them individually or get a really good amount. Sometimes there's trace mineral supplements that are liquid that have some amount of one or more of those, and then also trace minerals like lithium that could be involved in mood. So those could be an option at times too. But if somebody were to get sick, then most supplements don't really help that much. Aside from the ones I mentioned, there might be one or two that might help a little bit. One of them is elderberry. So out of the kind of commonly known ones, echinacea probably doesn't work too well for most things, but elderberry might work a little bit better, especially if you get a good brand.
And then on the topic of kind of joint health, is there anything, obviously technique and form is like, and kind of fatigue management are huge, but in terms of supplementation or even dietary, like nutritional things we can do, is there anything on that behalf that we can look at?
Well, most people will probably get sufficient protein, but if they don't, then protein is super important for both joints and muscle. But second is there's tissue in the joint space, and the tissue is made out of stuff. And sometimes people will supplement glucosamine, but the joint tissue is made out of more than just glucosamine. There's hyaluronic acid and a bunch of other stuff. So you could take a bunch of different supplements, or if you like to cook and you eat meat, then you can eat joint tissue more or less. Like if you have a slow cooker or pressure cooker, then you can eat tissue around a joint, and it actually tastes better than the regular muscle meat. So it's got an additional benefit. So I used to live in Chinatown in Boston, and there would be these Chinese supermarkets, and I would notice what people were buying. And one time I bought tendon, and I made like tendon broth and stuff. So tendon is tendon, you know, like there used to be this saying in Eastern cultures, what was it? It wasn't you are what you eat. It was almost like eat what you want to be or something. So, you know, there'd be really gross stuff. Like if you want to have more virility, then eat testicles, or, you know, if you want thyroid health. Those actually ended up being somewhat true, because if there weren't testosterone supplements back in the day, that's really the only way you could get it. Or if there weren't thyroid supplements, eating thyroid was the only way you could get it. But if you eat joint tissue, you are getting joint substance. And that could even apply a little bit to bone broth, a little bit, but not as much. But bone broth does not have a ton of minerals and stuff like it's sometimes marketed as. It's mostly amino acids, a little bit lacking in diet, such as glycine. So it could be important for that. It could maybe help gut lining a little bit. And it could have a little bit of these substances I talked about. Other than that, there's not a lot of things that help joint tissue. One of the things could be undenatured collagen, type 2. And it's a C2CII. And that doesn't work by providing collagen directly to your joints, but it's more or less a kind of immune system thing. Like if you have joint pain or joint issues, then your immune system could recognize and have a certain effect. I think that's how it works. But UC2 has a decent amount of evidence, and then curcumin does as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's actually, out of interest, I don't know if you know, Kamal, I imagine you might, like if you're eating tendon, is that a protein, or is that, like, what is it? A fat? What's the breakdown?
Yeah, it's a protein. It's almost all protein. It's very slippery. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever been in an anatomy lab, like a human tendon is. So in theory, it's actually a pretty good way to get amino acids. But most people don't eat, you know, we have unlimited, like chicken hunger, especially bodybuilders, like chicken for lunch, chicken for dinner, chicken for whatever. But most people won't eat tendon all day, every day. But I don't think there's much detriment to it. Like you could eat tendon every day and be fine, and you'll get a ton of the amino acids that are used to build tendon, you know, and ligament.
Is there anything to, I think I've seen like gelatin spoken about, because I guess that's, I don't know, you can make I think people are having it like pre-workout, and that then, because there's been some studies into looking at gelatin close to the bout of the exercise, looking to help with that sort of thing.
Yeah, so collagen and gelatin go into the same category. I think gelatin might be collagen after it's, I don't want to misspeak, but it's the same continuum,
right?
Same product. There's type 1, type 2, type 3 collagen. There's usually different forms are in the same supplement because it takes some money to separate those out. The other one is usually it's bovine collagen, but there's also fish collagen that might have a slightly different effect. But in general, I'd say it's worth trying, just because it's different than most supplements. Like the two types of protein I'd say are worth trying just because they're different are collagen is different because it's not going to provide a lot of your muscle building amino acids, but it's going to kind of counterbalance the amino acids you get from your muscle building supplements and diet with ones you get less of, like lysine and proline. And then the other one is if you have a lot of money to burn, cold processed whey protein has the cysteine not undenatured linked, and that can have an immune benefit for some people. Usually it's studied in the context of people who are, immunosuppressed or something like that, but a undenatured cold processed whey protein may provide slight benefits compared to all other kind of protein supplements. There might be other proteins that are worth thinking about other than those, but those are the ones off the top of my head.
Fantastic. I think I could dig your brain forever, Kamal, and I'll probably have to bring you back on to dig into some other kind of things and subjects to talk on. If you were going to leave, I don't know if there's kind of one supplement that you've recently seen or like even a food that maybe is underappreciated. I'd love to just, see if there is something that springs to mind that you kind of want to share with the audience.
The food that I hate that is great is liver. And my family is vegetarian growing up, and then at certain stints I would try vegan diets for a long time just because I forced myself to watch certain documentaries, and the factory processed meat is just kind of terrible for the animal, and I still struggle with that. But the animal product that tastes most like an animal is liver. It's like it tastes like minerals and blood and stuff. I never ate that growing up, so when I would try to eat it, I could not handle it. But the two foods that are so rich in nutrients that are lacking in a common diet are liver and oysters. They're just so rich in these minerals, and liver also in vitamins, that you could theoretically use those for a multivitamin, multi-mineral supplement as a food, really. The superfoods like acai and blueberry and stuff, those are good because they've been studied. They're not good inherently. By that I mean that blueberries will have been studied and shown to potentially increase cognitive benefits, especially in older people. But that's only because there's been a lot of studies on it. The benefit isn't huge, and it's definitely worth trying because, in my opinion, blueberries are delicious. And they're actually relatively low in carbs, so you can eat as much as you want if you can handle it gut-wise. But in terms of just pure nutrients for the dollar, like liver is insane. And I think that's why, whoever, I don't remember which Golden Age bodybuilders, Dave Draper and some other ones, ate liver fairly regularly because it's pretty awesome for that. But if you can't handle it, there's ways to get around it, like pate, and some people even slice it up and swallow it as a supplement, so they don't have to taste it. But that's the one food I'd say is pretty good. And some people say it's important to get, grass-fed quality liver because the liver is where toxins are processed and stuff. And that might or might not be true, but it never hurts to pay for quality for what you put in your body.
It's making me think of the next level on that. It's like the umbilical cord of people eating that.
Yeah, if you make a liver umbilical cord smoothie, then I'm sure that'd be a ton. You just put a little of, what's that called before the milk is produced? Colostrum.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, you can't get more nutrients than that. Blend those together.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think it's unfortunately, liver is one of those that I've also had a bit of just not been able to stomach it. But maybe you've kind of at least encouraged me to seek it out and try it at some point, because that is definitely something I've avoided.
Doesn't hurt to try once a year, and if it doesn't work, you can try it next year.
Kamal, thank you so much. I do actually want to touch on, I know we've been speaking a long time now, just briefly, because I was very fortunate to be invited to be a beta tester for your new kind of product that was just recently released, Examine Personalized. And I loved it. As again, we spoke at the start, don't have time to dig into the research or see the new studies, but I want to, and I want to see it, and I want to see what's relevant to me. And I really enjoyed Examine Personalized for that reason, as a coach or as a practitioner, as someone just interested in maximizing things. I don't know if you could just briefly let the listeners know about that. I'll definitely make sure we have a link below so people can sign up and see more.
Yeah, sure. So the gist of it is that a few years ago, I realized that I couldn't keep up with studies, and I'm a researcher by trade. So I was like, nobody else can. So we were trying to figure out for a few years how we can structure it so that people can be exposed to studies without getting overwhelmed. So personalized was the answer to that. And out of 25 categories covering most health topics, you choose the ones you want to read about, and you get the study summaries directly from us every month about the latest studies. So it used to be like, on our Slack channel at work, we would say, hey, did you see the study about HMB? You know, like, what does this mean? Blah, 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 blah. And then we say, oh, should we put it up on the website, or do we need to read about it more? Now, the study is just there. We try to write a really easy to read summary without jargon. And if there's an important caveat, we say that too, and that's it. Basically, you get the study direct, and if you want to learn more, then you read it in the study itself. And we're going to try to cover basically every important study, every single important study. If it's covered in the media a lot, we'll put a tag that says, you know, covered in the media. I can't remember exactly what the tag is. And if I think it's super important, either for trainers or dietitians or physicians, then I'll tag it as editor's pick. So it's actually, you know, I like Examine a lot, so I'll say this, but I think it's kind of a steal. It's pretty cheap for what you get. Like, we price things so we can cover our bottom line, but we're never going to be millionaires. You know, I'm an average dude sitting in like a small room right now, you know, doing this podcast. Like, I chose this job to kind of make an impact and help people rather than working for some, you know, big corporation here. And we priced it so that we want to make it so that if somebody, for example, is on a fixed income because they're older or has a disability or lost their job or doesn't have that many clients at the moment, they can still afford it. We hope it helps you retain clients. We hope it helps somebody's health. We hope that if you have older parents or grandparents, you can use it to help them, because I find stuff every month, you know, that can help myself or my girlfriend's parents. And that's really our hope, that we keep getting emails that say, hey, I would never have known about this if you wouldn't have told me. So I just hope it helps people.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's very clear by the whole of Examine. And if any of this podcast is anything to go by for people and they're interested in what we've been talking about, I think it's a product that they really love, because like you said, you kind of, as I was using it, I was just reading kind of the summary, seeing which ones really interested me, and I could just click straight through to the study and read it all if I wanted to, and I could create an infographic, or I could use it for myself, my training, or someone else's. So again, I mean, that's like bodybuilding and stuff, and there's even more like health. If people have specific health concerns, they can stay on top of that. So yeah, I think that's fantastic, and I want to say a massive thank you for just everything you do with the Examine, but also spending the last hour with me. I really appreciate it, and I know the listeners will have really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's really my pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. I don't know if you can tell, so it's not, you know, this is like a good break from my day.
Awesome. Kamal, thank you so much. And listeners, thank you for listening. Take care. So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries,
our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
the exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy. We're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge, and I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.